And so I still have clients who are in their 90s, which means their kids are 50, 60, but their kids are at home, and any day at this point, in their 90s, it could be their last day here. I mean, it's the same with
Mm.
all of us, but as we're hitting that age, right? And so I talk to them about transition planning. What's the plan when you're not here?
Hello, and welcome to Forever Home for Our Kids with Disabilities. I'm Valerie, mom to two with disabilities, one visible, one invisible. I'm a life coach and an author. This space has been created to help you navigate the journey of creating a secure, sustainable forever home for your child. We'll chat with parents on this path, realtors, financial planners, and other experts who can make the process easier. Why am I so passionate about this? Because seeing my eldest thrive living independent of us was a gift I didn't always know I could give. I want you to have the opportunity to explore giving that gift to your child. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Valerie, mom to two with disabilities, one visible, one invisible. Today, I will be chatting with a certified elder law attorney who also specializes in special needs planning. Shannon Laymon-Pecoraro has established herself as a preeminent voice in elder law and special needs planning. As the founder of East Coast Elder Law, Shannon brings not only exceptional legal skill, but also a deeply personal commitment to serving the community. A recognized authority in her field, Shannon frequently shares her knowledge as a lecturer, both locally and nationally. She has delivered multiple presentations at Stetson University School of Law's prestigious Special Needs Trust Conference and is a professor for their tax certification program. All right, so welcome, Shannon.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. So, Shannon, tell us a little about your special needs mom journey.
So I waited to have kids a little bit later in life. As a lawyer, we kind of focus on school and get through that. And so in 2015, I had a set of twins. And early on, I could notice that one of them was a little bit different than the other one, right? And I think it's a little bit easier to compare because they're same ages. They should be modeling very similar development skills.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally in kindergarten is when we started to notice like she really didn't want to pay much attention in school, very hyperactive. I used to say very boy-like, and for girls, that hyperactivity isn't noticed as much as what it is in boys. And so finally in first grade, whenever we got them out of the private school system, because during the COVID pandemic, we put them in a private school so that way they could have a typical educational setting as
Yes.
opposed to trying to do remote learning because I could not teach kindergartners. I can teach lawyers, I can teach, college kids, but I could not teach reading and writing for sure. And so in first grade is when we sat down with the teachers. And, at that point in time, we kind of realized that there's something going on, right? And obviously, with my being heavily embedded with the Autism Society and other local organizations, we had one of them tested and she was diagnosed with executive functioning disorder at the time.
Okay.
At this stage, they're not necessarily ready to throw a label on her,
Okay.
but we have noticed that there are, differences. She's very academically smart,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit academically lazy in terms of like she would turn in her work and just not like finish it. She'd be like, all right, I answered the questions, I'm done. I don't need to do the rest of this, whatever. And so the doctor has indicated that she could go either way, later testing, and we will at some point in time probably go through the Vanderbilt program to determine what she has. But with girls, it's very common to misdiagnose autism, ADHD, or an anxiety disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not really quite sure what that's going to lead to, but that's where we're at in life. And she has a 504 in school that I had to actively fight for. The school district did not want to give her one without either an ADHD or an autism diagnosis. And so finally I told them that wasn't an excuse anymore, that she does have
Mhm.
a diagnosis. It's executive functioning disorder,
Yeah.
and that even without a diagnosis, they still have to do the rating skills. So now she's doing very well in school, and the teachers have to make sure that she is going back and reviewing her work. And
Mhm.
so now we've gone through a BC student up to an AB student as a result of her 504. So
Wow. All right. So you mentioned a Veldebamp program. So could you explain to us what that is?
So there are certain colleges that have some in-depth programs to be able to test in particular for autism in females. And
Mm.
one of my really good friends, a guy named Jim McCartan out of Georgia, he's another special needs planning attorney. We're both members of what's called the Special Needs Alliance here in the States. And he has a daughter with autism, and he's the one who let me know that Vanderbilt University has a program. I believe Yale has a program, and Stanford has a program.
Hmm.
It takes a while to get in. I historically was of the mindset that as long as she was getting the services that she needed and that she was matriculating okay, the label itself didn't really matter to me.
Hmm.
Just because I don't necessarily always love the labels. Even whenever I'm working with clients, I normally tell them, like, tell me about your kid. Like, yeah, the diagnosis is important, but at the same time, like their hopes, dreams, what they can accomplish, that's what's really important, right? And so Jim is the one who let me know about the different programs that provide much more in-depth testing, much more reliable, and basically was like, for the benefit of her, you really need to get her, the
Hmm.
diagnosis is important for her long term. We will move into that direction at some point.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing about that because I didn't know. Well, first of all, I don't live in the States, but it's really cool to know that there are certain programs out there where we can get more in depth. And I'm assuming as they give you the in depth, is there part of that sort of strategies that they will give you just to help you navigate life for your child?
Yes, and even, some of the behavioral therapists, some of the doctor that gave Ainsley her diagnosis, he actually had given us some recommendations on
Hmm.
how to get her to like refocus and retrain. She's very visually motivated or like very reward driven. And so we had developed like a system with the teacher treat. And so we had developed these like felt stick-on labels for her desk that she could attach. And so when she had a really good day, she did all of her work, whatever, she would be able to spell out treat. And once she spelled out treat, then she would get to pick something that we would do with her. So whether or not be go to the movies, go to, she likes to play video games and stuff like that. So whether or not it's like going to the arcade or whatever that might be. And so in first and second grade, that was actually how we did it. So she could visually see that reward. And
Right.
then we've now moved on to much more of an intrinsic reward system because, in life, we do not get visual rewards on a regular basis. So I wanted to like let her know, like, this isn't going to be something lifelong, but it's something that helped motivate her. But that was at the recommendation of the doctor.
Wow, cool. All right, I love that. I love that spell out treat. And yes, I have a child with autism, which came later. We got that diagnosis when they were probably about 15, 16. And then we had the ADHD diagnosis at the end of grade 5, I believe. So,
Females, I mean, we have that, which is why I've not been in a rush to get the diagnosis because that diagnosis of ADHD versus autism, there was a study actually down at UNC that discussed the misdiagnosis in particular of females. And, obviously at fifth grade, we were still identifying as a female at that point in time. But for me, that's not uncommon to hear. We had the ADHD at fifth grade, and then we moved into a different diagnosis because I see it all the time in females. So
mhm.
that's great to hear that journey though for you. So you have the one with autism.
Yes. Well, actually, both of them have autism. The oldest, Melody Ann, she was born with a prolapse cord, so CP or cerebral palsy, and very involved. So she's total care. And then the diagnosis for autism came later because we didn't realize it wasn't until a speech language pathologist came working with her and said, have you ever thought about Melody Ann being on the spectrum? And we're like, no. But then it made sense because when we look back at her development, she didn't want to smile. She didn't want to look at us. She wouldn't look at herself in the mirror. Yet she learned all her concrete stuff really quickly. She learned her numbers, her colors, and even though she couldn't communicate verbally to us, she could let us know in other ways that purple was purple and yellow was yellow. And she understood the numbers. So it was just interesting that the diagnosis came later. We didn't even think of it. I had no idea that you could have a dual diagnosis. We were just dealing with cerebral palsy. And so it wasn't
Well,
really as big a surprise with our youngest when we got that diagnosis. Because again, when we look back, we remembered the flapping of the hands, didn't really want to hang out with her peers, wanted to be more with the adults, and enjoyed being on their own. So other little things as well came up as we started to look back. How did we miss that?
I think, well, as parents, we're just trying to get through the day, right? Well, especially, when you have one child that already has a physical disability, right? You kind of focus on that. And once again, most of my families, I always say they're just trying to get through the day to day. When we start talking about the legal aspects and compound that onto, what I do, onto everything else that they're just trying to go through, it can be overwhelming. And so I think some of the non-visible disabilities, we love our kids for who they are, regardless of, what it is and how much they may drive us crazy at given points in time. But it's probably harder to just recognize because of where we're at that phase of our lives. And if you're already dealing with a physical disability, it's completely understandable.
Well, thank you. And I do have to give myself grace. It took me a while to actually give myself grace. My husband and I are like, how do we miss it? How do we miss it? But as you say, and with Melody Ann being total care and us having to do everything for her, and the youngest was just seeming to do really well, very smart, very smart. Started reading at the age of 3 and just picked up things so quickly. So it wasn't very obvious. And it wasn't until I started realizing they're not responding to discipline. They're not necessarily following direction. They are very messy. You could tell where they sat at the table.
Well, that's easy to say too. Like, isn't that a normal child thing? Like, just like a neurotypical child can also make a mess. Like, these are not like things that it's not until later it's like, oh, this makes sense. You can go back and look at it. Because my child that does not have a diagnosis is messier than the other one. Her room is a constant disaster. And I'm like, Addison, how did you get spaghetti on the counter? Like, where did this happen from? So, it's easy to overlook those little details.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yes, giving ourselves grace. All right, Shannon, I happen to know that in your high school years you volunteered. So tell us about this because this is something that kind of helped shape your career and your passion for helping others.
Yeah, so in the high school, I originally lived in Guam and then I moved back to New Jersey. And while I was there over the summers, I would go home to Delaware, which is where I was born and raised.
Hmm.
As a military kid, I kind of, moved all over the place, but Delaware is to this day still home in terms of that was where I was born. That's where I spent most of my, younger childhood years. So in the summer, they had a camp through United Cerebral Palsy of Delaware. It was called Camp Lenape. And
Mm.
it was at that time, it was no longer exclusively just for kids with disabilities. Instead, it became an all-inclusive camp, but primarily still centered on, children with disabilities
Hmm.
to, go out and have fun and be able to swim and engage in music programs and, random arts and crafts or whatever the case may be. And so I started off as a volunteer, which then for a lot of us, it was making sure that for the kids that couldn't feed themselves, right, that we would be there to help feed. And then we swam every day because, as you know, with a child with cerebral palsy, water therapy is hugely beneficial for, just relaxation of the muscles and everything else. And so we would be responsible for changing undergarments. We would be responsible for getting them into the bathing suits, getting them redressed, those types of things.
Hmm.
I enjoyed it and just found that it was a very rewarding experience. Even, I was very, very young at the time. And then the following year, we had moved back to Delaware at that point in time from New Jersey because my dad had retired from the military. So this was 2001 because my senior year of high school was actually during September 11th. So that's the only reason I even remember, I think, the years. But they had asked me to come back. And at that point in time, then I was a pool aide. So all day long, I was just with kids inside the pool, which, as a teenager, once again, that's really fun. And then from there, I became the music director for the summer before I went off to college. And so that is where I think my love and my understanding for the disability community, prior to that, we didn't really have anybody in my family that had a diagnosis. I'm not going to sit here and say that there wasn't maybe some, non-visible disability there, but that was really where I just learned about the community. And I never thought that that's where my career path would land me. From a very young age, starting in fifth grade, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. Back then, I would tell you I was going to do corporate law because I'm originally from Delaware. Every single Fortune 500 company is, that's where they're incorporated. And, Delaware has special courts just for corporate law. And so whenever I went through law school, that's what I focused on. And whenever I came out of law school, I landed my first job. And within the first 3 months of my practice, I had to work on my first special needs trust. And it was an elder law firm. I didn't even know what elder law was. I did not know that like disability, special needs, like none of that was actually like a law practice thing. I guess I just never connected it. I thought more social work, right? And so I immediately like grabbed on to the special needs trust arena. And so by within the first 6 months, I knew a lot about, just the protection of assets. It took longer for me to understand the intricacies of all the assets that are available here in the States. Yeah, so that's how my career path just kind of landed. And now at the end of the day, I get to go home like I did good today. I did good work. I helped people today. And so yeah, that's how it all kind of developed.
Wow. That's pretty cool. I find it interesting how sometimes we are led into our path. I think of myself, I've been a physiotherapist for a very long time. And I remember as a student going to a place called Fieldhead Hospital, which had a lot of people with disabilities, more physical disabilities that were there. And I loved that placement. Like I loved being with them. Had no idea that this would be my life because my oldest child is total care. So I just find it interesting how we sometimes get led into our path, our career path.
Mhm.
So go
And
ahead.
you probably can relate to this. I do believe that it teaches us a whole new world of patience and
Yes.
empathy too, especially whenever it now becomes very personal in nature to us, right? And so just last week, I had an elderly woman who had an accident in my office, right? And of course, my receptionist has never had to deal with that before. And I'm like, it's okay. Like this just happens. You know what I mean? Whereas I could also see me in my younger years being like, oh my goodness, like what is this? And so I just think that sometimes, yes, some of those like formative things like happen and they lead us in a path, but I also believe that it also teaches us other valuable skills in general. I'm from the northern part of the United States, and so very fast paced, very like we don't got time to deal with anything, very direct. And I do believe that with Ainsley's diagnosis, it has taught me to be much more patient,
Hmm.
much more kind of understanding, and it requires me to slow down a
Yeah,
little bit more than, so I believe that there's learning lessons involved in, that path as well.
absolutely. Love that. Love that. All right. So for our audience who may not be familiar with guardianship, can you explain more about that for us?
Here in the States, I'll tell you that a guardianship is going to be very state specific in terms of what is the actual process, right? And fundamentally, the big thing is that, in the States, the second that we turn age 18, we are now our own person. For some of my families, it's something that like we don't even think about because when you do have a child that, let's say, is total care, right? Like your mom. And you know that even after age 18, you're mom. And there's nothing that's going to change the fact that you're mom. And so here, what we have to do is we have to actually petition the court to get the authority to be able to continue to make basic doctor's appointments, to
Hmm.
be the one to determine what the course of care is going to be. Because absent that authority, technically the individual themselves has the ability to make their own decisions. What I have found is that a lot of doctor's offices or even health insurance companies can be a little bit more flexible whenever you do have a history with them. So, for
Hmm.
instance, if you have your child's pediatrician that has been with them since they were little and they know this child is total care, the office is much more there and available to say, like, yes, we know that we need to make this medical decision. Yes, we know that mom needs to be a part of the doctor's appointment. But when you have, there's some doctor's offices, and it's becoming more and more strict because of HIPAA rules here in the States that basically say, sorry, but you don't have any authority to speak on behalf of your child. And
Hmm.
so in Virginia, we can file at 17 and a half. to make sure that then we've got the authority at age 18, so we're not missing a beat. But absent that, we do run into problems. And what the process, at least here, looks like is we've got to file a petition and we have to have some sort of medical evaluation that says, that yes, this person is incapacitated.
Mm-hmm.
Some states will require the doctor to actually be subpoenaed and show up at the court hearing. And so it just kind of depends. I practiced in Pennsylvania, and for a long time, they wanted the doctors physically there, but they have moved to a written evaluation system now, like Virginia has. And so then, we have a guardian ad litem is appointed in most states, and that is because that individual is designed to kind of investigate. Are the living conditions appropriate?
Mm.
Are the parents good parents? Because I hate to say it, not all parents are great parents and adaptable to, their child's needs. And then is the person really incapacitated? It's the same process that we use for our elderly people. And so for a lot of my families, they're like, well, who else would make decisions? Who else would be you know what I mean? Like those kind of intrinsic decisions. But it's the same regardless of the age of the disability onset. Then we go to court. In Virginia, we do not do much of anything virtually. You do have to physically appear. The judge wants to see your face. And essentially, I think it's their way of saying, like, if this isn't important enough for you to come and show and take the time off and, do this, then you don't really care about going through this process, right?
Right.
And then once the court enters the order, in Virginia, for the most part, because there's so many I's to dot, T's to cross, there's not a whole lot of fanfare at the court hearings. The judges do have to give some explanation, explain to the parents what their duties are, but they've read the medical evaluations, they've read the guardian ad litem's report, they've read the petition, which are all very, very clear cut in terms of where it is. And if nobody's coming to contest, the judge is pretty much like, I've read everything. Is there anything else you want to offer at this point in time? Now, I can't say it's the same with all states, right? And there's some states that allow an individual who can still make decisions to consent to a guardianship. And this is where in the States, we've had a lot of high profile celebrity guardianship cases, everything from Britney Spears to the football player from The Blind Side, the movie The Blind Side.
Yes.
Him in particular, he had a voluntary guardianship. He had actually consented to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not possible in Virginia. In Virginia, point blank says that you have to be an incapacitated person and that there's no lesser restrictive alternative. And so for us, I always tell my clients, like, it's not the same as what you're seeing around, from states like California or Tennessee, where you have these voluntary things. This is in Virginia, it's very clear cut. This is the only option here. So it's going to depend state by state on what that process looks like. But in a nutshell, it's kind of a very similar process. There's court hearing, there's petitions, there's guardian ad litems appointed for the individual.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It sounds like it's fairly similar in Canada, where I am in Alberta, where we can at 17 and a half start the process because it does take up to 6 months, if not longer. And same thing as parents, we have to apply to be the guardians of our child. I know when we were having to do this, I'm like, really? I've been doing this since my child was born, and now I have to do this and pay to be their guardian. But I'm understanding now, as I'm maturing through this whole process, why that needs to be. And then the other thing I just want to point out as well, when you pick your guardian for an alternate, because my husband and I obviously are the guardian for our oldest child, so we had to pick an alternate in case anything happens to us. And so we picked an alternate, and now we're actually redoing our wills, updating them, because our children are older now. And I checked in with the guardian because I know her life is extremely busy. She has 4 grandchildren. She is so involved. She's still working full time. And so I didn't know if she had the bandwidth to take on my child should anything happen to Scott and I. So checked in with her, and she has decided to bow out. So I had no idea what the process was to change that alternate guardian. So I'm really basically having to go through the whole process again. I actually have a meeting on Tuesday. So I have to pay the money again. We had to find the alternate. We have to get references for them. And then the whole thing will go through the court. It will be expedited because we're just changing one thing. We're just changing the name of the alternate guardian. So just to make people aware that when you choose your guardian, if possible, choose them for life.
Well, and one of the questions I have, and this might be a Canada specific thing, do you have to have an alternate guardian put in place? Because in the States, like in Virginia, we do not have to, we would call it a standby guardian. So I have the option to do a standby guardian. I'm actually working on one right now where we're going to appoint a stepfather because the biological father has passed. So stepfather and two siblings. So that way there's a team and, as needs change, any of them can kind of do what needs to occur, but that's not required. Instead, by will, we can actually appoint who that recommended guardian is, and the courts are then supposed to give deference to that, what the will says in terms of guardian.
Yeah. No, here we have to have an alternate guardian. And as I say, now I'm having to go through the process again just to change one name. Anyway, don't get me started.
Fun
It is the
times.
process. It is the process. So I just have to roll with it. Anyhow, so I just have a question for you, Shannon. What do parents need to be aware of when it comes to estate planning?
So I think the biggest thing is, so in the States, most families are very familiar with we need a will, right? There's a couple different layers here. The first one is that historically in the States, a lot of people would just totally disinherit their child with a disability. And what it was is they were afraid to leave them anything and lose the
Mm.
benefits that help sustain them, right? So either the Social Security program, which by the way, when a parent dies, as long as they were age 22 prior to the disability, they will latch into their parents' work record and they could have $1 million and they still get the income from that. They'll
Okay.
also trigger into our Medicare system, which is the same system that our retirees use. But it's those Medicaid benefits that are truly critical, particularly whenever we have children who need hands-on care. Historically they would leave it to another child and then like with the moral obligation that that child would then take care of the other child. So I always step back and I tell the family, I'm like, you need to give what you want for that child to that child, because at the end of the day, if your other child dies, their estate plan takes over, right? So you know that morally that yes, this child will take care of their sibling. However, what happens is they're not thinking when they do their estate plan like, hey, is my wife going to take care of my sibling the same way that I would, or do they get into some sort of creditor issue where the creditors now take that money, right?
Mm.
And so in the States we have what are called special needs trusts. They were established under a law called Over 93, and so we've had them since 1993. And it's a vehicle where we can put money in, and basically Medicaid and SSI cannot look at the assets that are in there because it's
Okay.
designed to supplement and not supplant what public benefits is otherwise providing. And
Mhm.
so I think that that's kind of one of the biggest things is just making sure that you leave to the individual what you want that individual to have, I think is kind of the biggest mistake that I see. And then secondarily, I would say whoever you're entrusting your children with, like make sure they want to do it.
Yes.
Just because, I mean, and you kind of touched upon that with the guardianship, and I don't think it's that she doesn't want to do it. She's just saying I have the bandwidth to do this right now. But I think so many families are like, well, clearly their siblings gonna do it.
Yeah.
But I know that there are other families that I have that are saying like, hey, by the way, like it's going to detrimentally impact my other child in a way that I want them to be able to focus on their own families or
Mm.
whatever it might be. And so that succession planning piece, I think, is hugely overlooked in the community
Yeah.
because as parents, we want our kid in our home, right? We want our kid, and we're bad parents if we consider any alternative living arrangements that may provide for some succession when we're not here. And so I still have clients who are in their 90s, which means their kids are 50, 60, but their kids are at home,
Mm.
and any day at this point, in their 90s, it could be their last day here. I mean, it's the same with
Mm.
all of us, but as we're hitting that age, right? And so I talk to them about transition planning. What's the plan when you're not here? And some of them don't have other family that's going to step in. They haven't thought about it because it's even harder when you don't have family, especially in my autism community. And I know that you'll be able to relate to this. Change is difficult for us as just human beings. We don't like change. But when you throw that change in the mix, in particular with my autism community, it's hugely devastating, right?
Hmm.
And so if we're now going to say, hey, you've got to pick up and uproot from the house, the only house that you've known forever, for however long it's going to be,
Yeah.
and your parents are not here. You're the only people that you've ever known to support you are not here to help through that transition. It's hugely impactful and detrimental to the individual themselves.
Hmm.
And so I encourage families to think through that process. Only the family can decipher when that transition is appropriate. So I think that those are my two things. Leave assets
Yeah.
where you want them, and then think through that transition plan and execute the transition plan before you die.
Yes. And this is why I do what I do, Forever Home for your kids with disabilities, because I've seen that happen. And for us, I got to a place where I couldn't sustain it anymore because Melody Ann is total care. And then I have my second child with their disabilities and their need of parental supervision and the scaffolding that we have to do to try to take them to independence. And same thing as you're saying, that transition piece, I just felt like I needed to have something because Scott and I don't have any family anywhere close to us. I think 12 hours is the closest, and all my family's across the ocean. And so it became important for us because we don't want to leave our youngest with the responsibility of their older sibling. And so we just needed to have something that was sustainable. And so that's why we set up Melody Ann in her forever home. It turned out to be a beautiful thing for us because she got to stay in the home because it's wheelchair accessible. We moved out. So the transition for her was so much easier because she was in her same home, in her same bedroom with four staff that we had trained. And we had an agency come in then and provide the rest of the staffing. And so she had people that were familiar with her and her care. So I honestly, Shannon, have the peace now. If anything were to happen to Scott and I, Melody Ann's life would continue as it has because she transitioned so beautifully. The staff now know her really well. She is quite the advocate for herself, even though she's nonverbal. She has a communication device, but it's just been so gorgeous to see her grow as an independent person. And she would never have had that opportunity if we hadn't have set her up. So that's why I do what I do to help other families realize it is possible. You can direct what you want for your child with their forever home. And as you say, then the succession, when you pass, it's going to be smooth.
Well, and I think, I hear a lot of parents like there's like an internal struggle. And I know we talked about the grace to, just from looking back at things, but I'm like, it's okay to allow others to help, right?
Hmm.
Because I think that a lot of us where like this is our obligation, this is our responsibility, and generally we want to be the ones to be responsible, right? And so I think understanding that it's okay for somebody else to help, and I have a lot of conversation with my family, like, had this child been a neurotypical child, right? Wouldn't we want them to have their own environment? We would want them to live an independent life. We're just saying that this child's independence is a different form of independence than
Yes.
maybe had it been a neurotypical child. We all want our kids to grow up, fly the coop, have
Yeah.
families of their own, and so for Melody Ann, she has her own place,
Yeah.
right? Which is what we would want for any children that we have. And her family is her caregivers
Yeah.
who love and support her on a day in and day out basis. And that's
Yep.
okay to celebrate that. It doesn't have to be, I can't believe I'm doing this to my child.
Hmm.
And so I look at things from a very optimistic point of view whenever I'm having these conversations, even with my clients. I know one of the things here in the States, Medicaid will pay for attendant caregivers.
Hmm.
And depending on, like in Virginia, depending on the waiver, you can get 24-hour supports inside the home. It's hard to get the 24-hour, but it's doable.
Hmm.
And what I see is a lot of families, they are essentially saying, well, nobody can provide the care that I provide. I need to stay home with my child. I get paid under the Medicaid waiver system, and they don't bring in outside help. While I understand that, because I am a firm believer that nobody provides the same care that
Right.
you do as a family member, right? And it doesn't matter, once again, even my elderly population, to get them into a nursing home, they
Yeah.
don't get the same type of care as if daughter was there doing it. But I also say if something were to happen to mom, like let's just say she had to go into the hospital, and she's the primary caregiver, what happens? Nobody's properly trained to be able to provide that care. So
Hmm.
once again, it's about bringing in that assistance and saying, I don't have to do it all myself. And looking back at it and saying, like, is this really in the best interest of my child? From
Hmm.
the perspective of all it takes is one crisis and the cards just fall, right? And so I wholly support your program of Forever Home because of the fact that you want to talk about that transition and talking about, the additional supports. And it doesn't have to just be the family. And quite frankly, it's not always in the best interest of the child to just be
Hmm.
a family member.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we consider it a team effort, right? Scott and I are still very involved with what goes on in Melody Ann's life. We happen to be the landlords of the home. We still own the home. And so for us, we're still involved in her care, her programming. And there's a lot of dialogue between the house coordinator and myself. We meet weekly to sort of discuss how Melody Ann's week's gone. So you can be as involved as you want to be. And as I say, I just look at it as a team approach. And as you so rightly said, no one else is going to care for our child the way we do, but it doesn't mean to say that somebody else caring is bad care.
Correct.
All right. So I've so enjoyed our conversation. I just want to ask you, what's the difference between estate planning and financial planning?
Estate planning is going to be much more legal planning, right? Getting documents put in place, making sure that the provisions are in there to take care of whatever it might be. Historically, and working with my community, everybody thinks estate planning is just planning for death. I believe that estate planning is actually planning for death or disability, right?
Mm,
And so that could include old age, dementia, whatever. And so powers of attorney, advanced directives, which will give somebody the authority to make decisions for you whenever you can't make them. And then that death planning, whether or not it involves wills. A lot of us look at trusts as death planning, but they can also be life planning tools as well. So just that basic, underlying arch of who's going to be able to make decisions, what can happen with your assets, what authority do we give agents? That would be more the estate planning side. There is a financial planning component. I am different in that I do have my Series 65 license. I do have my life and health license. So I do have the financial component side of it. But the vast majority of lawyers don't have that. They're lawyers and their job is to make sure that we've got surrogate decision makers and that our assets are passing how we need them to. The financial planning side of things is going to be twofold. Do you have the assets necessary or the savings and income and everything else to get through your retirement, right? And then secondarily, for my families with, individual disabilities, the other issue is going to be, and have we provided enough support for them whenever we're not here? Whether or not it be life insurance so that, there's some sort of, windfall whenever something does happen to you to help support the care levels that you guys are providing, or, whether or not it be looking at where do you pull money from, right? And how do you invest the assets, those types of things. So that's going to be the key indicators between the two.
okay. Thank you so much. All right, Shannon, where can our audience go to find out a little bit more about you?
Okay, so my website, it's still being built out. I just started my own firm on March 31st. So, yeah,
Congratulations.
I've been doing this for 12 years. And so it was time for me to fly the parental coop of other lawyers. And so I'm on my own, but it's www.eastcoast-elderlaw.com. And if anybody is looking for a certified elder law attorney in their area, because that is the gold standard in terms of do these people know what they're actually talking about? If you go to NELF.com, NELF.com, that is where your CELA designated attorneys are going to be. There are also some great special needs practitioners around the country that are not certified elder law attorneys. And you can find them at the Special Needs Alliance, which is the abbreviation is SNA. And I think it's specialneedsalliance.org, I believe is the website there, but those are kind of going to be your key indicators or, your key contact information for anybody that does what I do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Before we conclude our conversation, I'd love to hear some words of encouragement from you to parents who are raising kids with disabilities. What message would you like to share with them to offer them some inspiration?
I've probably already touched on it, but it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not have the answers. And, you're just trying to get through the day to day. Have some grace for yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Shannon. It's been lovely to have you on the show. And I just wish you all the best as you have launched on your own. So, best wishes with all of that.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So, audience, keep building your child's future. Live with intention, embrace the journey. Thanks for joining me today on Forever Home for our kids with disabilities. I hope today's episode gave you something new to think about and it increased your confidence on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, do tell others about it. Use the text feature to let me know your questions. Tell me what you want to know. Until next time, take care and keep building your child's future.